So your jokes now, Arthur.
Christie one.
Yeah.
Okay. So 6 o'clock,
5:58.
sorry,
You have 2 minutes.
okay. Do you have Linda?
Not yet. No. Recording, aren't you, Arthur?
Yeah, we
Yeah,
can,
we're live on
we
YouTube.
can just go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Go for it.
So, this is the legal committee meeting of the Common Council. We are just going to start with roll call at 6 o'clock, October 4th. Ronnie?
Here.
Art is here, Morris is here, Ryan, I do not see Ryan.
No.
Also in attendance, Michael Hoffman here in the room, Tom DiPietro, and Crystal Peck is online. So for our agenda this evening, I have put the tree ordinance, so that was a new item under the 3 other items. And I see that Hilary Hillman from CAC has joined us. So I would like to move the tree ordinance item up to the top, because I know Hilary is traveling, and that way she can comment or weigh in on any observations Crystal has around this. And we can go from there. So Crystal, you had said you were going through it and that you would have comments for this evening. So shall we begin with you, or that's the best way to go?
I haven't been able to finish getting through it since it was sent over yesterday, so I'm gonna have to. I'd like to just sit back and hear the reasoning behind for some of this before I chime in.
So Hilary, can you hear us?
Hello, yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you now. So do
Okay,
you want
cool.
to just give us a background on intent here?
Oh, okay. So, well, that it is written in the document. The intent, and thank you for doing this and holding this meeting about the topic. The reason, okay, I will go through the reasons. Let me find this in the document. Okay, the purpose of the ordinance is to preserve trees, minimize damage and removal of trees, and to encourage the planting of trees, thereby enhance the health, safety, and general welfare of all of the inhabitants of the city of Hudson. In the purposes, A, to create a tree board to establish regulations governing the planting, maintenance and removal of trees and shrubs in the public streets, rights of way, parks, and other municipally owned property of the city of Hudson. B, preserve and encourage the planting of green foliage on city streets and public property. And C, replace trees that must be removed from the public property because of disease or lack of development or danger or other reasons for tree removal. And D, require all new construction, renovation projects coming before the Planning Board, Historic Preservation Commission, or code enforcement to get a permit, to include an existing tree plan layout when going for a permit, and a tree removal permit, and have the applicants get a tree removal permit and a mitigation plan that's approved by the Hudson Tree Board. Most all other small towns that, whether they have parks departments, often this is run through a parks department, but most small municipalities have a tree ordinance of some kind to take care of the health of the trees within the city and to promote planting of more trees, and basically to have a strong tree canopy for all sorts of good reasons. As we all know, there's health reasons for having a tree canopy. That's for the health of human beings and for the environment. And because trees are clean the air, and they help drink up rainwater and retain soil, and there are many good reasons for having a healthy tree canopy, which is also in this document. We've been doing a lot of work trying to get trees planted, and it feels like every time we turn around, more trees are being also cut down, and some are coming down naturally. We saw the what happened in the cemetery after that big storm a few weeks ago, and that is a different thing, that we also need to take care of our trees that need to come down, so that it's good that those were in the cemetery. It's unfortunate they did damage tombstones, but no people were harmed in that large tree loss. But it was also a lot of work. This is a side issue, I know, removing dead trees or dying trees for safety reasons. And we had, as Michael Hoffman can attest, we had done a lot of work on getting a tree grant for the removal of trees. And we were not able to get that grant this go round, but the DEC will have more of those in the future. What this ordinance is more about is building our tree canopy and maintaining it, and having say over how people, or what should be planted, when and where and how, but also to stop people from randomly cutting down trees if they're doing a project. Let's say they're renovating a house and they want to clear trees out. Well, in order to do that, if we do have this tree ordinance, there would be a need for them to come to the tree board, a Hudson Tree Board, and with a plan of the existing trees on the property, anything over 3-inch of caliper, and come up with a plan for, if they need to remove those trees, how they'll replace them, so that we at least are getting the same amount of advantage out of the green infrastructure, that it will be replaced, and to come to the Hudson Tree Board and make that plan and build that plan together. So within this ordinance, there is a plan for adopting a Hudson or making into law that Hudson would have a tree board. And this would be, if I remember, we settled on a 7-person board. I should have reread the document myself today, but I've been traveling and I'm on the West Coast and I'm really sorry. I don't remember, but it does outline here how a tree board would be established. It would be an all volunteer tree board. They would meet once a month, sort of like the CAC does. They would, there would be one representative from each ward at minimum. And among that group, somebody who is, has a professional level of understanding of trees, probably a landscape architect or somebody else from the city of Hudson that could really bring a lot of expertise to the tree board and help people make plans and decisions about their projects as they're going forward and how to replace trees that they might have to remove. Or even if people just want more trees on their property, they could come to the Hudson Tree Board and say, hey, I want to do my part in my backyard. It's not the front yard, it's not street trees. Couldn't you help me? So a tree board would help educate the public, but also have the say about what trees would be planted when street trees are being planted and keep the diversity level right. They would also be tasked with maintaining the database that was so beautifully set up by the forester who did our street tree and park tree inventory. And we have a lot of data that we need to upgrade that inventory with all the plantings that we've been doing in the 1.5 years since that inventory was done. And also we have to get into that database all of the trees that have come down due to storms, et cetera. And that tree board would be also very helpful in just having a tree board in the city gives us points with the DEC for getting more grants. And they could also put us on our way to becoming a Tree City USA, which makes us even more eligible for grants through the Arbor Day Foundation and through DEC. So that is a sort of an overview. You might have more specific questions that I'm happy to answer. And
I did have a couple of questions, sorry. So, first of all, in the current situation, I'm talking now just about trees on city streets and so forth. Currently, this happened recently, if a tree needs to be removed, DPW is doing that, correct?
yes, that is correct.
And are they also doing pruning where necessary?
I know that they did pruning as necessary on Warren Street. And yes, I know that they also did some on Union Street. I can't remember the full extent, but they did a lot of pruning this year.
So one of the things that you talk about, and I don't think this ordinance makes any change to the fact that that body of work, that piece of work gets done by DPW, because one of the things that you acknowledge here is that code enforcement is overworked, that this is something that would have to be worked out between the council, mayor, BEA, and Mr. Hague. But I think also there needs, and there are places in this document where you do talk about DPW's involvement in the public trees. The thing that, aside from the board, the thing to me that is new that we don't have right now is the structured approach to having to get a permit if I want to have a tree that's in front of my house that's on the sidewalk removed for some reason, having to go through a process to do that, penalties for not following the process, and you're putting a structure in where somebody knows how to go about having a tree planted. So I think all of those things are very clear. The issue with regard to, let's say somebody is doing renovation on their property, I think, and Crystal, this would really be a question for you. I'm not sure whether or not we have the authority to tell people whether they can or cannot take down trees on their own property. If it's not, you do have language in here where you talk about trees that are, yes, they're on your property, but they are overhanging or providing shade to the street. And so you go through all of that. But if I just have trees in my backyard that are not overhanging and they're absolutely in my property, I don't know that the tree board would have any authority to weigh in on what people can and cannot do, or even they might give advice. If somebody's looking for advice on what kind of trees to plant, but I don't think they could be prescriptive. So I don't know, Crystal, is that something that you could, or do you want to just take more time to look at this?
Well, I can actually answer that one right now. You can require a permit to remove private trees. I typically don't see that where you're talking about one tree though. Usually it's when you're looking at, possibly clear cutting ordinances, things where contractors or developers try to get around like seeker review because they're planning something later on, things of that nature. So that was one of the things when I did, a quick run through on it. That was one of the areas that stood out to me. I've absolutely seen ordinances like this dealing with public areas and sidewalks and all of that. It's the, any tree for renovation purposes is the part that really caught my attention. And I wanted a chance, and I'd like a chance to just take a look and compare it to some of the other municipalities that I know that have similar type ordinances, to see if I'm seeing anything similar or being able to, tailor the restrictions a little bit to, I know what's worked in the past for other similar municipalities. The other aspect, there was something else too, since I'm talking, that jumped out at me as well, is when you've got prohibited actions, you're prohibiting utilities from pruning, spraying, doing certain, certain work to trees in a public area. You're going to have a problem with that with certain utilities, like a National Grid, those types of utilities. You're not going to be able to require them to come in to get a permit to prune. So that's another thing that needs to be taken a looked at here.
That already happened. Not that long ago. Where National Grid came in and took down a bunch of trees.
Oh, yeah, well, they prune behind.
No, they took down trees
Oh, okay,
on the Empire Trail area.
okay.
But yeah.
Usually they just prune where it is
I know
overhanging.
it's overhanging, but this was
Mhm.
more severe.
So, Hillary, I think the intent when you were talking about, if somebody is doing a new project and making the tree plan part of the planning board process would be, let's say I have decided I am, I bought a property, it's a lot that may or may not have trees on it, but I'm gonna put in a hotel, whatever I'm doing. And then part of my proposal to the planning board has to have some landscaping aspect to it. Is that where you're getting at there?
Yes. That is what I'm getting at. And I want, I'm trying to be careful to not make it seem too punitive, but rather a work together with a common goal, and that we would want to be very encouraging to anybody who is doing a project to be very engaged with the tree board and to consider the tree canopy that's coming down, that they might be removing as part of the public. It might not be in the public realm, but we're such a small community that trees in my backyard are important to the whole of the city. So we're trying to find where that sweet spot is in the language. And certainly, as Crystal brought up, this is exactly why it's coming to legal committee. You will know better than the CAC where we need to write language that makes it clear that if there's an emergency, things happen, and you just have to let them happen and make them happen as fast as possible, or that National Grid has this right, or that there are certain things if DPW needs to come in and do something in an emergency situation. So that that's one reason why it's here with the legal committee. There are so many things in here that it's really not in our wheelhouse to have a clear understanding, like just how far we can extend into somebody's backyard, or if we can't. So, but we do want it to have some teeth so that somebody can't just buy a huge swath of, I mean, not that there are any, let's just say that McGuire's sold and somebody wants to clear cut all of that property and get rid of all the buildings. And then we have big rains and we have this big washout of detritus and bad material coming down into the river. We don't want that to happen. We want to have some teeth in it where we can, there's an X amount of, the soil retention from old trees is huge. The carbon sequestration from old trees is huge. So I don't know where that sweet spot is. That's why we're here at the legal committee now.
So Tom has a comment.
Yes, Michael and I did some very light research today, and the opportunities that Hillary mentioned that this enables don't require that much in the ordinance. Just to make clear, you don't have to have something as stringent as the first version of this. You follow what I'm saying?
I do follow what you're saying, but I think one of the things that is good about it is that it creates a structure.
Sure, no,
That- that's
right, no, I'm not saying against the ordinance, I'm just saying it doesn't.
Right,
have to.
no. Understood. There was one other thing, Hillary, that I was kind of looking for in here, I didn't find it. And again, it's because it's a private property type question. So, during the storms, this is an issue I'm trying to address in my ward. On private property, a tree that was, fairly dangerous, split in two and half of it came down, damaging the property, the building that the property was on, that the tree was on, but also coming down across the neighbor's property. It's currently precarious and dangerous. The person who removed what was left of it and what had fallen down indicated that it was dangerous. It's on private property, and as I've tried to explore, this is not a DPW issue. They don't deal with this, and code enforcement doesn't deal with private property or trees. So is there anything that could be put into this that would actually address the city having some authority to have some avenue where dangerous tree has to be removed? It's tricky, and I don't know, Crystal, how we would do that, but this is a situation where that I haven't been able to find any entity in the city that can take
If I remember
responsibility.
correctly, there may already be code on the books that require dangerous overhanging things that go into other people's property to be removed. I remember reading into this when one of my neighbors complained about like poison ivy or something that was poking over the side.
If you could point me to that, I couldn't find any. If you can point me to that, that would be very helpful. Because the direction I got from code and from DPW was that there really wasn't anything that they could do about it. But I think this ordinance, if we go forward with an ordinance like this, would be a very good place to put language like that. So even if it is on private property, if you have a dangerous tree, then this is the procedure that you must follow. And if somebody brings it to the tree board and to their attention that we have this issue, then the owner can be notified that they need to prune or take down or do whatever to make the tree safe.
This section C 22-22 of the city charter gives the power to the Commissioner of Public Works to remove trees or shrubs that are in detriment or danger to the public in public right of way. So,
But this is not in public right of way.
okay,
That's the problem.
got it.
But it is a danger to the neighboring property.
If
So
you
there's-
look,
That's the issue.
if you look at the housing code too, that talks about overhanging objects. And that could be where you had seen or you had heard about having to remove certain overhanging objects that overhang structures. there is a provision in there as well.
Yeah.
That could cover it.
I will take a look at this particular situation. It's not that the tree right now is overhanging, it's that the tree is precarious, and then the next storm it will come down. And it's not on public property, it's not in this street. So it's a kind of a difficult situation. But I think this might be a good place to have language that addresses what a property owner's responsibility is vis-a-vis a dangerous tree. Harry, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, I do have my hand up. I was wondering if this could be written in, I know the situation that you're talking about, and I think that we will see more of those situations. But I think that I think there needs to be a rule in here, or it needs to be written that code enforcement would have the authority to say this tree has to be removed and it has to be at the homeowner's expense. I think something where the commissioner of DPW would have any jurisdiction, it still should not be incumbent on the city or DPW to do something about a nuisance. And I know that code enforcement could say something if somebody didn't have a railing on their stairs going up to their house, or other things that are possible danger to others. And so to me, it seems it would be more code enforcement than DPW anyway.
That was where I thought it belonged with code enforcement also. And I like, the couple of things that we decided here this evening don't really cover this scenario. And code enforcement didn't feel that right now they have any authority to do anything about this, because, what code are they going to cite? But I agree with you that it should be at the owner's expense, not the city's.
Mm-hmm. Well, and this could be the thing that gives them the teeth for having code enforcement to be able to cite somebody on.
So I think, in the sections of this where you talk about, the need for removal in public space, etc., if the tree is dangerous, and you have processes for all of that, I think somewhere in there, language that gives code enforcement the authority to address dangerous trees on private property, regardless of whether they're overhanging a public sidewalk or passageway. Crystal, you can maybe look at that.
I do need to look into that one a little bit further, to see what kind of limitations that we're going to have, and also what kind of support you're going to want code enforcement to have. Code enforcement themselves may not have be qualified enough, honestly, to be able to tell if a tree is truly, is dead and dangerous or not.
Right.
You may need to bring in an arborist report, and then the question is, are you getting that prepaid by the property owner to cover that expense? How is that coming in? So I do want to look at that a little bit.
And one of the reasons why I was thinking that this situation might be covered in this ordinance is because the board will have on it a professional arborist. So it will have somebody who is capable of making a professional decision.
Yeah, I just want to look at this one a little bit, look at that issue a little bit further.
Okay. Do we have any other questions or comments from Art? Do you have anything?
No.
Ronnie, do you have anything else?
No, thanks for asking.
Can we see if anyone else in the? I don't see any other hands raised. So if there is nothing else, what we will do, Hillary, is, and thank you for joining us, we will go through this. Crystal will continue to do some work on it. We will go through it. Perhaps have a further discussion of it with the CAC. Or Tom, do you think that once we've reviewed it and commented, do you think we should send another version back to Hillary and the CAC to edit, and then bring it back, and then we can bring it back to council? Okay, does that work for you, Hillary? I think you may have. She's gone?
I think we lost her.
Okay, that's fine. All right. So moving on. I'm gonna go back to the agenda, community character. The business community committee board had identified that they would put a subgroup together to develop language and definitions relating to the retail formula. I have reached out to them. I have not gotten anything back yet, so I do not have an update on this. I will continue to pursue that to try to get language from them. I'll give it another couple of weeks, but then I think we need to just start working on the language ourselves and give it to them for their review and comment. But at this point, I have not received anything back from them. Any questions on that? Okay, next one, speed limit reduction. At our last meeting, I indicated that I had been in touch with an engineering company that does this speed reduction work. I also followed up with some engineers from Creighton Manning, they did speed reduction in Tivoli. Rob Perry sent me information that he got from DOT, that confirmed by DOT, that although we have roads in Hudson that are designated as Route 9 or 9G, that we technically do not have any state or county routes within the city of Hudson, because we have operation and maintenance of those streets. And when I researched some of the municipalities that had gotten their speed limits reduced to 25, and I read their code, it would go through, you know, on all of these streets with the exception of, and then it would list the specific county routes with the language where the state has operation and maintenance responsibility for those routes. So that really puts things, I think, in a much simpler perspective for us. Both companies that I talked to gave about the same kind of estimate of how complicated this is. Neither of them thought it would go above 10,000. I've asked the Creighton Manning team to send me a proposal. What their process is, they would do in different parts of the city, they would do some speed checks, and then they would come up with a recommendation. It falls well below any threshold for an RFP. The folks I was talking to from Creighton Manning also have worked with Rob, and they worked on the Stewart project and so on, so they know the city.
But the engineers are the very good.
They know the city really well. So I think that's will be a good approach for us. So as soon as I get a proposal from them, I'll bring it back to this committee, but it looks very promising.
Great.
Any questions on speed limit? Okay, moving right along. Vacancy law. So, that one we've done. Crystal, you had sent us a document, a sample document, going through this. And I think Tom had some discussions also with Michelle around this. So I will hand it over to Crystal, first, and then Tom, you can bring up your comments.
We can throw something on, yeah, too.
Okay.
So the document that I sent over is really just a reference point of model vacant provisions and vacant property provisions, as well as the basis in state law where some of these come from. And it's really just used as a point of reference in kind of going through the city's own law. I took a look at the bullet points, and Tom, you might want to actually expand on this with your conversations with Michelle before I dig in too deeply. But I took the bullet points that Michelle had initially provided and cross-referenced that with, you know, what we've got in our law now, what I was seeing. I pulled about 7 other city laws, vacant property laws, to get a feel for how they were changing and expanding some of these sections. But I think before I even jump into that too much, Tom, it might be helpful if you go through your own, you know, what you and Michelle are working on with it.
Well, since Michelle's here now, we'll let her do it.
Sure. Hey, everybody. So basically, when I got started, people had voiced concern about vacancy law not necessarily doing what it was intended to do, and some questions about whether tightening up the vacancy law could contribute to more affordable housing. So we had, was part of our ADLN grant, we had BFJ consultants do a vacancy, like a review, did our vacancy law and other memos. And I'd shared a brief presentation that on the council in the spring. And so they had some recommendations about how to tighten up our law. Basically, the law is written, we are not implementing it that way for a lot of reasons. One of the reasons it seems to me is that's not clear what the goal of the law is, whether it's supposed to be about, increasing safety, reducing blight. Is it supposed to be about trying to activate properties to get them back onto, getting more use out of them, commercial or housing? It's not quite clear to me or BFJ what the purpose was. And so based on that, the law is a lot of requirements, but a lot of loopholes. So for example, if you're a vacant building, but if you like properly sealed up, then you're not vacant. Or if you're a vacant building, but if you have any kind of building permit in with the code enforcement, then it's not vacant, even if that building permit has been with them for years. So I guess my question to you guys is, I kind of did my job of like looking through what's working, what's not. I've made some recommendations of how to tighten it up. I think my question to you all is, what do you think is the problem this is trying to solve? That's kind of my first question. For one thing, like we don't have that many vacant buildings. Craig said we have between 30 and 50. A lot of them do have pretty active work going on. Out of that 30 to 50, like what's the specific issue? Is it that we wish it could be used for something better, or is it that's kind of some kind of blight or health and safety issues? So I think that's the first starting piece, is like, what are we trying to accomplish? And then from there, we can maybe think about with input from Crystal. Also, Chris Brown is on here. He's got a lot of experience with vacancy. We can kind of think about what's maybe some of the best policies.
Do you want to comment on that, because you have brought this forward to this meeting?
I want to provide a little context for those who, before Michelle was here, the law was put into effect, what was drafted, because there was this, in response to this feeling, which wasn't really heavily substantiated, that certain developer was warehousing a lot of vacant buildings and doing nothing with them. However, it didn't really work, if that were true or not, because as Michelle pointed out, the loopholes were such that it didn't take much to be in compliance. Secondly, some on the council actually thought it might be not a revenue raiser, but the penalties or the fees involved would actually generate some revenue, which it did not. So that was some of the initial justification for the law. Now, I know you, Margaret, are concerned about a building, for example, that is truly vacant,
Yes,
and how do we deal with it?
and we don't seem to be able to do anything about it.
Right.
And it is impacting the property that
Yeah.
it was adjoined to. And this is Michelle, this is a property on Union Street that is practically derelict at this point, has not been lived in for a number of years. Code has sealed it up and written citations and so forth, but we do not appear to be able to do anything about it. And it is definitely a vacant building.
There's one, I know in Philadelphia, for example, I don't know if this would be too extreme or what, but they base their penalties on boarded up windows and doors. In other words, that would define vacancy rather than, I suppose, but again, if you have a building permit, that would then undercut that. I'm not sure how the Philadelphia law works. Maybe Chris Brown knows, since Michelle says he has more.
I believe that in this particular building, the one on Union, I'm pretty sure that code enforcement boarded it up. They boarded it up because it was It was a real safety problem and, you know, concerns about vermin and all this kind of thing, so they actually secured it.
And in terms of the like the building permit, for example, like some cities have, you know, your building permit isn't utilized or whatever within a year, there's like a time limit. And then, you know, if you haven't done anything, now some kind of penalty kicks in or some action needs to be taken.
So there's Chris. Did you hear what I was saying, Chris?
Yeah, hi everybody. I can't speak to Philadelphia's law specifically, but as Michelle alluded to, I really first got my first start in planning doing the vacant building registration management for the city of Troy. I did that for about 5 or 6 years. And we started out with about 600 vacant buildings. And when I left in 2020, I think we were down to 350. So the ordinance was responsible for some of that. Some of the things that I saw in the model language are really good. There are a few things that could be woven in. So for example, throughout the ordinance language, it refers to both vacant and abandoned buildings, but there's only a definition for vacant, right? So there are a few things that, there are some things that can kind of be modulated. But Michelle's point is really well taken. You know, what is the point? Like, so what is the outcome that you're hoping this ordinance produces? I think that's really needs to be kind of the guiding statement. And then from there, you can craft the ordinance that works best for the city.
The thing is, if a building is not occupied, and in our current code, this would not be considered vacant or abandoned building. It's not occupied, but it is secured in a manner that is in accordance with its original design and so forth, but it is not occupied. Then that's not in violation of anything. And if it's maintained and so forth, then that's fine. Private property owner has every right to own a property that they are not utilizing and that they do not choose to put on the market as a rental property or anything else. That's their right. I think what I would like to see us addressing are the properties that are not currently being used for habitation, that are not being properly maintained, like the one on Union, for example. And where it's an ongoing issue. It's not so much, you know, a developer buys property and takes them a number of years to do something with it. It's during that period, are they letting it rot into the ground, which we have seen. So I would really like to see it focusing in on neglect that is resulting in the degradation of the property and also causing problems for adjoining neighbors. So I think that should be, yeah, I think that should, for me, that's where I'd like to see the focus.
There's a property owner towards the river who owns 3 properties that are all in neglect. We could possibly have, or one would possibly have fallen down.
Right.
And there's nothing to cover it in the existing code. I don't think.
Are they occupied or not?
2 aren't, 1 maybe.
Right.
You know, I'm talking, I don't know.
I think I think we should also do the work to like look at it from the perspective of you have a very small city which is going through a housing shortage. I think Michelle and I, along with Theo, we had this discussion regarding vacant properties and you know, trying to see if code could be you know, written in such a way that we do penalize people for just holding onto property that is not being utilized either for themselves or being on the rental roll. And I think that should be something that we look at because we are in a city that is, you know, severely, you know, housing shortage, and this could be a way to maybe alleviate that or at least incentivize people for, you know, fixing up their property, or whether if they can't fix it up, sell it to someone who can fix it up and either live there themselves or, you know, put it up back on the rental rolls.
Ronnie, I'm having a little difficulty hearing you. I want to make sure I understand. You're saying that you want the code to address vacant properties, given that we have a shortage of housing, where it's not derelict, but it's not being used. And that we should be addressing that, is that correct?
Yeah, I think that should be a lens that we utilize for this law as well.
So the problem that I see with that is that I don't see, and would be a question for Bristol, that we have any authority to tell somebody, private property owner, what is a suitable use of the property and what is not a suitable use of the property. If it is maintained and it is not a danger, I think they may very well have the right to have a property that they are not using.
I think there's some precedent. I think New York City a while back did pass some sort of law that creates like this housing emergency. I don't know if we would fall into that, but there is precedent where municipalities address things like that. I don't know if we would qualify, but that's the reason that I was thinking of it from that lens.
Michelle, the current inventory that falls into this category, what's it like? I mean, what is it?
I'd have to go through with Craig again, but it's small. I think that out of the I don't know, let's say roughly we have 40, between 30 and 40 maybe vacant. I know some of them are issues where there was some kind of fire or some kind of issue like that, and the homeowner has not had the funds to rehab it. Some of them are an issue of, kind of absentee landlord, not sure where they are. Some of them, there's one or two, and then some of them are secured, they're kind of in good condition and they're just kind of empty. So it's probably a small amount. So I think some of the question, and if this is something that's of interest to you guys, I can do a little more digging, is what's that kind of what's that cost benefit analysis here, right? How much work do we want to do in terms of the law and the implementation? What would we actually get out of it? How many houses would apply to?
Well, I mean, it's not, Michelle, to me, it's not about how many houses we get out of it that people can then move into. To me, it's why should somebody have to live beside an abandoned derelict building that is actually causing damage to their own property? And what can the city do in that situation to protect those residents?
Right, what I was saying was more to Ronnie's point.
Yeah.
Again, that's what I was, kind of saying that I'm curious about,
Usually.
Yeah, I kind of agree with Margaret, that it's more of at this point, derelict properties. And that it is about well-secured empty buildings.
Well, and it's also about, if we look at the Union Street property, that's been an issue for years, right? What can we do as a municipality to not have that situation? I think that's an interesting perspective, if only given the super small slice that I think would be applicable to Michelle and Ronnie's point. I mean, small slice, I would also take that too. I think if there's a world where we can treat both.
Yeah, that's I'm not saying one should be one or the other. We should be looking at those avenues as well.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm curious, Chris, and all those properties you brought back onto the rolls. Did you ever take over a property, develop it, and then reimburse the owner? I've seen that mentioned as a sort of a last ditch approach.
No, we reimburse the owner of the vacant property.
Yeah, it's in the book that Wade Beltramo did.
Yeah, shouts to Beltramo. No, we didn't do that there. We had a couple of different things. Troy had a land bank. Troy had the Capital District Habitat for Humanity. Also a NeighborWorks partner up there called TRIP. It's the Troy Residential Improvement Program. So there were a few nonprofit organizations that were involved in reclaiming vacant buildings. We did successfully actually grab a couple of properties that were classified zombie buildings. So these are the buildings that, it's a little bit murky what the ownership is, but at the end of the day, the bank is really responsible for the disposition of those properties. We did manage to reclaim a few of those. We also settled with a few of those banks and their property maintenance servicers for a little over $500,000 between Troy, Albany, and Schenectady. We never set up a program where, and I was actually just talking to Michelle about this. So I can speak from Troy's perspective just because that's my area of expertise. We had a graduated fee schedule where at a certain point, if whoever was responsible for the maintenance of a vacant property was paying $5,000 a year in vacant building registration fees. If those fees weren't paid and it was at any level, wasn't just the 5,000, whatever your annual fee was, if the fee wasn't paid on time, it just got added to your taxes as a lien. So we collected it one way or the other. What I was interested in doing was setting up a system where the commercially owned properties, so some of the ones that weren't quite zombie properties because the bank was actively taking care of the properties, setting aside a certain amount of money from those fees to help subsidize kind of the smaller vacant buildings that it was vacant, but it was vacant because, it's a homeowner who doesn't have the money for the repairs, right? So it's almost like a separate CDBG program. So you're still eliminating the vacancy and the blight, but you're doing it in a way that's much more, holistically healing for the city instead of just removing properties from folks who wouldn't have a vacant building if not for like the $5,000 that they need for capital repairs.
So, since, again, I'm coming back to you, Tom, on this, since you wanted the legal committee to look at this, what do you think our next steps are here?
Well, I agree with Michelle, we have to decide whether it's worth pursuing, I mean, if there is I would like to look at the inventory of the buildings to see what really is going on and is there
I
something,
think we need to have an inventory.
yeah,
And have it, Michelle, it sounds like you and Craig already have something. If we had something that categorized the properties as, we have definitions where it's not, if it's property secured, then I think it's not vacant in our current code, correct?
right,
So, I mean, if we had a listing where we can say, okay, this is the number that are not currently in use, or do not appear to be in use, but they're not a hazard or anything else, they're just not in use and they're property secured, and these are ones where they are not in use and they appear to be derelict. Whatever the categories are, and then these are ones that are currently not being occupied, but there's a building permit that's been out there for 4 years or whatever. If we had that kind of sense of what we're talking about, then we could maybe move forward.
yeah, that as one idea for certain is, the building permit has to be renewed or the longer it's out there costs more or whatever, something like that. That's not a bad idea to incorporate.
Could we put a limit on how long a building permit can be active?
Actually, oh,
Yeah, Crystal?
There are certain codes I've looked at which only allows the building department to renew a building permit after, once, and then after that, it's got to go to the planning board for review. And each time they have to renew that building permit, they have to pay the full fee again. So for some of the projects, it can be quite expensive. And then if they're not complying and they have to go to a planning board for review of the project, the planning board can start putting a little bit more, their feet to the fire. So instead of, maybe a year, they're going to say, all right, we want to see you come, but, you've got 6 months, pull your CO or you're coming back before us, and then there'd be a cap.
that's actually,
I like that,
that's really good because think of the old age home that's sitting vacant.
yes,
He's had approval for quite a
Yeah.
long time now.
yes,
And he doesn't, under current law, he doesn't have to go back to planning apparently.
no.
So,
I think that would be very good, because that would eliminate that category of buildings that just sit there with nothing being done for
you
years.
know,
right
that
now.
plan, yeah.
And then we need something else to deal with the direct buildings. And then think about just how many fall into the last category of not derelict, not technically vacant per our code, but not in use. So, okay, so, Michelle, I'll follow up with you and Craig on that. I'll also follow up with Crystal. Let's see, do we have any committee members have any new business you want to bring forward? Okay. Do we have, now that we have a quorum, that's exciting night for me. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
And Ronnie, do we
Second.
have-
Second.
all right, we're adjourned. Thank you all very much.